Hello and welcome back to a Clear and Obvious podcast. As always, I'm your host, Archie Corbett, and I'm joined by the delightful Sam Cole. Sam, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you, mate. How are you?
I'm not too bad because we've got something a little bit different today. We've got friend of the podcast and all round one of football's great guys, Derek Rae, back on the podcast. Derek, how are you?
Well, Archie, nice to hear from you and from Sam. It's really more of the same. I'm talking to you from Massachusetts, from the Boston area here in the USA. And on we go, spending a lot of time at home, a lot of time on long walks, doing my work all from home, preparing for Bundesliga games and columns and appearances on ESPN programs mostly nowadays. But yeah, as I said, on we go.
That's brilliant. Well, today we are here to preview and sort of go through your role in the new FIFA 21 game that's recently been released. Obviously, you're one of the featured commentators on that. Just take us through briefly the process of how you made the commentary for the new FIFA 21 game.
Well, it was quite distinct from FIFA 19 and FIFA 20. 19 was my first year as one of the FIFA commentators. 20 was really a continuation. It was mostly Champions League, although we extended to other modes in FIFA 20. Lee Dixon and I, Lee's my co-commentator. This year, we are the two commentators on the game, just us. And in terms of actually recording it, it was very challenging because we're in a pandemic year. We had started out doing it the usual way in a studio, but then the pandemic hit in early March. I was actually on my way to London to record several days of FIFA 21, but couldn't for obvious reasons and cancelled all my travel. And at that point, we were thinking, okay, well, maybe in a few weeks or a couple of months, we might be able to pick it up on the same basis and then do a lot of days at once. But of course, that wasn't meant to be, and we had to rethink everything. And the first plan was, okay, maybe we'll find a studio here in Boston, and I'll go into that studio and record my stuff, and Lee can do the same in London, and we'll just match it all up. But of course, one of the big things with recording FIFA is it's not just the two commentators. In fact, probably most players of the game don't realize that. It's a team effort, and it involves a producer, a sound engineer, and lots of people in the background, who are putting the audio side of the game all together. So we came up with this system, and we had sort of spoken about it, but we didn't know if it was really doable because the sound quality is a big part of what brings it all to life on FIFA. So we essentially looked into, could we build a mini studio in my home here in Massachusetts? And we would have my producer at his base in Vancouver at home, our audio man at his base just to the north of London at home. And that's what we did. We managed to make it work with a pretty sophisticated audio system, which meant that we could all talk to each other. And there was a slight delay on the line, about a half second to a second. So there was that, difficulty, but nothing insurmountable. And we made the game from an audio point of view that way. And I reckon I did around 21, 22 days at home throughout the middle of the summer. So we started in June on that particular part of the project, and we didn't get finished until the end of July.
How much trickier has it been recording from home? And what are some of the challenges you faced?
In some respects, Sam, it wasn't much trickier because, in fact, I would go as far as to say in some respects it was easier because we didn't have the usual time constraints. When we normally make FIFA, it's sort of 3 days here, 3 days there, maybe once a month or once every 5 or 6 weeks. And we have to make every second count because we don't have the ability to go back next week and say, okay, let's change something we did the week before, or, let's add to what we did before. So this way, because we were doing it not every day, but pretty much most days between early June and late July, certainly every week, and maybe a couple of days every week. There were some weeks where we did 3 or 4 days. So through doing that, we were able to much more easily pick up what we did the day before. So something, if we had finished a particular context the day before, we could just easily carry into that. Because a big part of it is making it all sound seamless. And even from my point of view, if I've done something the day before in a particular way, that is going to stay in my memory much more readily than if I had done it a month ago and I have to refresh my memory. So from that point of view, it was all, I'm not going to say easier or easy. It certainly is never easy, but it was more flexible, let's say, in terms of how we were able to all put the thing together. And, I think that was the enjoyable part. It's very much teamwork. I think, again, people don't realize it's a team. It's a producer, Andrew. It's an audio man, Pete, who's just to the north of London. And then it's the commentators. And I would record my bits this year. Lee did his bits independently. And we then would just all, chat every so often, but it would all get matched up, as it always does. That's how it's done to a large extent most of the time. But it really just was a different year. And I shared some of the videos on social media and on my LinkedIn just to sort of show people that we were like everyone else this year. Everybody has been affected to one degree or another by the pandemic. We've all had to change the way we do things. And sometimes there are ways of doing things in a better way. Sometimes we can improve upon what we did before. Necessity is the mother of invention, is the old saying. And I'm a firm believer in that.
What's the feedback been like from people online who may only know you from your FIFA commentary?
First of all, when it comes to feedback, I'll talk about Twitter first of all. I have a very good old friend who used to work for me, who went on to be a senior executive at Twitter. And he said to me when I first went on to Twitter, he said, I'll give you a bit of advice for going on to Twitter. Don't take any of it seriously. He said, because the people who are on Twitter and are saying things on Twitter, we're talking about a tiny microcosm of society. And he said, well, obviously and he was working for them at the time, said, I have an interest in making Twitter seem extremely important. It's not. It really is the tiny minority of people who will say things that are pretty extreme. So I think you always have to take that with a pinch of salt. And I mean that with comments positive and negative on Twitter. Now, the negative outweighs the positive for everybody on Twitter. Anybody who is in the public eye at all will tell you that the comment, if they choose to read them, and there are days when it's sometimes best not to read them because a lot of them lead you sort of worrying about the actual condition of the person who is uttering those words on Twitter. But the feedback for the most part has been good from people who know my work. And people who I think know the game and like the game. The bad feedback, again, comes from people who you do worry because you think, would you actually say that to somebody's face? And that's one of the rules I go by on social media. I will never on social media ever say anything there that I wouldn't say to your face or to Archie's face or to anyone else's face. That's just common courtesy. We are broadcasting, we are talking when we're on Twitter, but a lot of people don't seem to realize that. But yeah, that's what I sometimes see on Twitter is, well, I hear you on this game, but I don't hear you in England. And my answer, if I ever choose to answer, is, well, remember, the game is not an English game. It's a world game. It's going around the world. And there will be some English commentators who are unknown to people in South Africa or in the USA or in Canada or in Australia. And, you don't have time to get into that on Twitter because, frankly, if you did, you wouldn't have a life. So it's worth taking all those factors into account when it comes to social media reaction. But the short answer is there have been some very nice responses to it on social media. There have been some horrible responses to it on social media from, as I said, people about whom you might worry a little bit.
I mean, we here at the podcast, we love your commentary and we think it's great. And we know that the larger majority of people do. What we're going to go to now is something a little bit different. So we're going to, if you're okay to do us a little name pronunciation class, it's something that we know that you take pride in is sort of pronouncing each player's name as of their mother tongue in the correct way. So we've given you a selection of players and basically all you have to do is say their name and explain why it's pronounced that way. So I'll get up a picture of each player. And all you have to do basically is say their name and explain why it's pronounced in that particular way.
Of course.
So we'll start off with this man.
So let's go with this man's pronunciation. And again, the explanation would be that what you see is not necessarily how he says his name. So his name is Antoine Griezmann. Antoine Griezmann. All right? Yeah. And the reason why it's Griezmann is there's a little E there after the I, Griezmann, is because, first of all, his ethnicity is a little bit complicated in terms of, he's French, but he actually grew up in Spain, just across the border from France. But the way you will hear a lot of people in the Anglo world say it is Griezmann. Now, it's not Griezmann because, first of all, the M-A-N-N is not pronounced min anywhere else but in England, so it's man. And then there is that little subtle E sound after the I, so it's Griezmann. So there you go.
Thank you very much for that. Let's move on to the next player. Let's move on to this man.
Yeah, and this is the one that I probably hear about more than anybody on the aforementioned social media. And I've grown rather tired of that because there is a clip of him saying his own name, which should be, which should make it self-evident to everybody that they're saying his name wrong in England. And I'm a bit dismayed, to be honest, because when he joined, and he only joined a few months ago, Manchester United, it was very easy to figure out what his actual name is, as opposed to the name that's been bestowed upon him. And who wants to bestow a wrong name on somebody? But again, just check out the clip. You'll see it on my social media feed if you want to find it. But his name is Bruno Fernandes. And the explanation behind that is that, well, Bruno is fairly obvious. The Fernandes is that in Portuguese, and he's Portuguese, remember, he's not Spanish. In Portuguese, that DES sound tends to get swallowed into a sound. So the E gets dropped and the S at the end becomes a sh. A soft sh, not a sh, but a kind of a, it's almost a subtle one, but it's Bruno Fernandes. And as I say, were he, Spanish speaker, were he from Spain or from one of the Spanish-speaking countries in South America, then it would be Fernandes, but he's Portuguese, and so his name is Fernandes.
Because this is one of the ones that's obviously you've spoken about quite a bit, and as you say, you've tweeted about. Why do you think people, especially obviously in this country, insist with calling him Bruno Fernandes? Is it just because that's how it's sort of spelt and that's how we're used to potentially pronouncing that name?
I think part of it is, honestly, when a player arrives in England, how he is pronounced at the very start. And that's why I think as commentators, we have a big responsibility to get that right. Now, I may have explained this to you before on your podcast. There is a tendency when a player arrives for people in the media to get together and say, well, what are we calling him? And I always say, well, no, that is totally the wrong question. The question is not what are we calling him? We are not bestowing a name on him. What is his name? It's pretty simple. What is his name? And his name is Bruno Fernandes. Now, not every player helps with this because some will go along with it and say, well, yeah, you can call me that if it's easier. Now, but I would say to anybody, is it really hard to say Bruno Fernandes? No, it's not hard at all. It's easy for everybody to say Bruno Fernandes. It might be more intuitive to say Fernandes, but the fact is that his name is Fernandes. And there are interviews at the very start where he says, well, in Portuguese, maybe people don't get that. So, yeah, some people call me this other thing. But there's a very good example. There's a BT Sport piece that they did with him called The Perfect Player, where he talks about his perfect player, who happens to be his compatriot, Cristiano Ronaldo. And the first thing he says is, hello, this is Bruno Fernandes. And so I'm grateful that he did that, because I now have that in my stock, so to speak, so that whenever anybody says, well, why are you making up pronunciation? We're saying, okay, well, ask Bruno if I'm making up a pronunciation. Here you go. And that is his name. Sadly, I don't have hopes that it's ever going to change in the Anglo world. I really don't. I think people are very stubborn and they don't like to admit that they're wrong, and this is one where my pronunciation of Fernandes, you have to remember too, predates him joining Manchester United. So I did this pronunciation of his name my first year of FIFA 19. So we're going back a few years now. And it was based on research. It was based on talking to Portuguese people, based on listening to Portuguese commentators, based on Bruno himself. And so, I've had people say to me, well, why don't you change yours on FIFA? No, I'm not going to change the pronunciation when it's correct. But if other people don't want to change, I can't control that. I can only control what I do, and that's the way I proceed.
Exactly. Right. Let's move on from one Man United player to another. How are we pronouncing this man's name?
Well, the way he pronounces his name is Donny van de Beek. Donny van de Beek. And again, the V in Dutch has a little F sound, so it's not, it sounds more like an F than a V. And the DE is probably intuitive to most people, but the EE sound is an A sound rather than an E sound. So honestly, I couldn't really tell you what people have been calling him in England. I only know, again, the way that he pronounces his own name and the way Dutch people pronounce his name. And Donny van de Beek.
Yeah, because we've heard a lot of people call him sort of Donny van de Beek. I'm just assuming that's because it's EEK and people are just assuming it's that, but it's not, is it?
Yeah, people obviously are looking at the EE sound. But again, it comes down to the fact that he's not English. He is Dutch, and it has its own sounds. Every language has its own sounds. So yeah, I did see one person asking me why I was pronouncing Donny van de Beek wrongly. And again, it after a while it sort of washes over you. To begin with, I got quite annoyed about that, about not van de Beek, but just people generally saying, why are you getting things wrong? Because it falls in the category, honestly, of ignorance is bliss a little bit. I mean, if you're just ignorant about other languages, if somebody is, then I suppose that they would think that anything that is not pronounced as it is written is wrong. So again, I can't control that. I just want to get it right as he says it and as Dutch people say it.
That's certainly the way to go. Right, let's move on to the next man.
Yeah, one of my favorite players and somebody I've been covering in Germany for a long, long time, going back to his earlier days when he was on loan at Leipzig and he was at Stuttgart, but of course a Bayern mainstay nowadays. And this one, in fact, you can go online and find him talking to a friend of mine, Reshman Chowdhury, who was hosting the UEFA Awards a couple of weeks ago. And he's very, proud of this because his mother gave him the name. And his name is Joshua Kimmich. Joshua Kimmich. And again, I realize that second part is quite hard for people from the Anglo world to say. Being a Scot, it's not as hard for me to say that because the CH sound is one that we make, and it's one that Germans make and Dutch people make and many other nationalities make, that sound, which again, if you try making that, a lot of people in England just have trouble with that. So it ends up becoming a K sound, which is okay. It's an approximation. But if you want to say it properly, then it's Joshua Kimmich. Joshua as a first name, that again was his mother's idea. There are various pronunciations of the name. Of course, in English, it would be Joshua, but again, he's not English. So in that interview with Reshman that I mentioned, he talks everybody through it. And he says Joshua, and then he says, he gives a couple of examples of variations of that he absolutely detests. So, he's pretty clear about that, but it is Joshua Kimmich.
Brilliant. So certainly not Josh. Let's move on. Let's move on to a man who's been playing in the Premier League for quite a while now. How are you pronouncing his name? How is his name pronounced?
Yeah, well, you see, again, this one is quite difficult because he's from Belgium, and in Belgium there are two main languages. There are actually three official languages, but there are two main languages. So you have Flemish, which is really a variation of Dutch, and you have French. And so it's a bilingual country, multilingual country, because there is a portion of Belgium where German is spoken. And this is the most difficult one. What I would say to you, though, is that the name that has been given to him in the Anglo world basically is dead wrong. There is nobody in Belgium who calls him that. Kevin De Bruyne. He is not Kevin De Bruyne by anybody's standards in Belgium. But in the Flemish world, which is the majority world in Belgium, then this one is quite hard to say, but it's actually, again, easier for a Scot than it is for an English person. But it is Kevin De Bruyne. Kevin De Bruyne. So you sort of have to take the ow and oo and put your lips together. Aune, Browne. And that's actually kind of how a lot of Scottish people say Brown. Scott Brown. Kevin De Bruyne. Kevin De Bruyne. So that is how, but a closer approximation, this is what I don't really understand in the Anglo world, would have been Kevin De Bruyne, the color brown. For some reason, it became De Bruyne, and I don't know if that's because people looked at that name and thought it looks like De Bruyne, but it's not. So that's the way in the Flemish world. But then in the French world, it tends to be more De Bruyne. again, just it's a very different language with different sounds. So the Flemish version is the one that you'll hear me use, which is De Bruyne, Kevin De Bruyne, Kevin De Bruyne.
Brilliant. So again, it's definitely not Kevin De Bruyne, because that's
No.
just not how it's pronounced.
Correct.
Okay, let's move on to the next man, a man who's just moved to PSG. How are you pronouncing his name?
Well, on this one, I have to confess, when I first did his name and I went with all my Italian sources, I got this one wrong. And I had to revise it based on what he said when he joined Everton at the beginning of last season, no longer at Everton. But in Italy, he was always, and everybody referred to him, and he is Italian, as Moise Kean. Moise Kean. Then he went to Everton and announced to the world that he was Moise Kean, which is, again, the intuitive way that you would say his name. So I actually changed that one in the game. Hopefully it's gone through. I don't have control over exactly, when we make the change, if it does go into the system. But Moise Kean. Again, in Italy, people will not call him that. They will call him Moise Kean. So he made that change himself when he moved to England.
Is that something that, obviously, because they say it in Italy as slightly differently or quite differently, do you think that will change now he's out in France again? Do you think the way his name's said, or do you think it will just stay as Moise Kean?
No, I honestly don't know, because I haven't verified that, from the point of view of being in France. But I think that for the most part, that the English pronunciation tends not to stick very well in a country other than England or USA or countries where English is the main language. So I would be surprised, but it's really up to him. It's up to the player to decide. Where I have a problem is when a player decides to change his own name according to the country he's in. I have a big problem with that, because then you're doing nobody any favors, and then you're asking for it to be mispronounced by everybody. And you do have examples of that, where players go to one country and then they go to another, but specifically to England, and decide that they want it to be more Anglo-friendly. And it's usually an agent who has come up with that idea, because they think from a marketing point of view it's better.
Right, let's move on to the next man, Portuguese midfielder. How's his name pronounced?
Well, remember we spoke earlier about the ES in Portuguese being a different animal at the end of a name. So Ruben Neves. So it's the ES at the end is this sort of soft SH sound. Again, if he were Brazilian, same language, but obviously different country, then it would be more Ruben Neves. And even Ruben Neves, and even the E sometimes a bit wider. But since he's Portuguese, Ruben Neves.
Brilliant. And let's move on to another German fielder like we had earlier. How do you pronounce his name?
Well, this is a great one, because, as I say, I'm a fluent German speaker, and spend many hours a day speaking German to people, thinking in German. And this is one I get told regularly on the aforementioned beautiful social media, that I need to brush up on German names. Imagine that. Imagine telling a fluent German speaker that he needs to brush up on German names by people who don't speak a word of German. But the correct pronunciation of this fellow's name is Toni Kroos. Toni Kroos. So the R is in German is a R. It's from the back of the throat. So, again, in England, you don't really make an R sound much. In Scotland, we do. We sort of have the front R, R. In German, the R comes from way back here, from the back of the throat. So it's an R, R sound. So Toni Kroos. And so again, to somebody who hasn't heard it pronounced that way, that may sound strange. But, it's not Toni Kroos or Toni Kroos or anything like that. If you were to come up with an English example, an English equivalent of it, you would best be advised to say something like Toni Kroos. But it's Kroos, and so the O is not an O, it's an O. It's a different way of, again, rounding your lips when you say the O. So Toni Kroos. There you go. One for people to practice if they want to get to grips with real German guttural sounds. Certainly.
So it's not like Tom Cruise, it's not like that. It's just close. Like, okay, we will get learning that sound.
Practice, yeah, give it some
certainly. And lastly, Man United centre back here. How do you pronounce this fellow's name?
Well, again, by reading it that way, you might think it is pronounced a certain way, but there are in Swedish over the last O of his name that there are two little dots which you will see. In German we call them umlaut. So that is an indication that the sound differs. So that whereas O without that umlaut over the top is O. With the umlaut, it changes it to U. So think about O and U. It's a different sound. So his name is Victor Lindelof. Lindelof. And the O at the end has that U sound because of the marks over the top of it. I see a lot of people on their Twitters sometimes putting those marks over random vowels, and I will say, "Why are you doing that?" And they say, "Well, I think it looks cool." I'll say, "Well, you realize you can't do that over every single letter. You can do it over an A or an O and get it to change the sound, and that's the point of having it."
Yeah, because you speak about the umlaut there, so it's the same way as in Mesut Ozil's names, not Mesut
Correct.
Ozil, it's Mesut Ozil. So that's what the umlaut does to an O, right?
Yes, it does it to an O, it does it to a U, and it does it to an A sound. So, with an A, it changes it to an E. So A becomes E, U becomes U, so that, again, you take your lips together. Instead of going ooh, you go ooh, ooh, ooh. And then the same with O becomes ooh. And that's again, it's one of the great things I will say to people: learn languages, because honestly, it opens your mind so much. And if you haven't learned languages and you sort of you probably just don't understand any of this, and that's where I hear it from people who tell me I need to brush up on languages because they're so experienced in the art of linguistics themselves. Not really.
Well, that is certainly where the ignorance creeps in. Derek, thank you very much for joining us on that. It's certainly been an eye-opener, and I hope it's been an eye-opener to everyone watching, that you are pronouncing these names right in the exact way, just because you don't like how it sounds, or just because it sounds differently to how you think it's pronounced. That is how it's pronounced. So, yeah, Derek, thank you very much.
No, and before we finish, can I just say that on that subject, I think we need to put ourselves in the shoes of these players and imagine if you were in a different country, where English is not spoken, and every day of the week you are hearing your name, which you're proud of. We're all proud of our own names, our own families. You're hearing your own name being said wrongly by the entire population of that country. After a while, that is going to get a little bit annoying. So my philosophy going into it, whether it's with FIFA or just with games generally, I want, if that player ever hears my commentary, I want that player to say, there's a guy who has done his homework, and I'm so happy that he's getting my name right. And I think we would all want that for our own names if we were in a different country. So there we go.
That's certainly the way to go about it. Thank you, Derek, for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, guys.